Next board. I call
Mr.
Julian
Speaker?
Kinter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Green Party supports this bill, and we absolutely support Radio New Zealand and public broadcasting more generally. There's nothing really controversial about the bill itself. I suppose the only comment we can make is that the government certainly took a very, very long time to get this bill before the House. It's not a very complex one. I'm not sure why it's taken them so long, but it was required by the statute to have a review of Radio New Zealand's charter, and that review was undertaken in 2006. It's taken a very, very long time for this bill to come back to second reading. The real problem for Radio New Zealand and for public broadcasting generally in New Zealand is the fact that it is incredibly underfunded. I think the comments made by government MPs really gloss over the fact that we have underfunded public broadcasting, but there's been a funding freeze since 2008. Now, that effectively means there's been a 10% cut to Radio New Zealand since the National Party came into government. And of course, they would like to say, well, that's great, we're providing the same great service, but we're spending less money on it. But it's clear that this is having an impact on the ability of Radio New Zealand to deliver that important service to New Zealanders. In 2007, there was an independent audit by KPMG, which concluded the organization was already, at that time, seriously underfunded, understaffed, under-resourced. It recommended an immediate funding increase of $6.7 million. And instead of that, this national government has frozen the funding for the 7 years that they've been in power. And that has clearly had an impact. I mean, there have been very high-quality journalists who haven't been able to be retained because they aren't able to receive any sort of increase to salary, despite the fact that costs of living are going up. So we have a bit of a crisis in public broadcasting because I believe this National Party doesn't really believe in public broadcasting, despite what they say. They don't believe in public broadcasting. They don't really believe in democracy. And you can hear that in their talking points on this speech where they talk about how Radio New Zealand needs to be more like a business. Well, the purpose of public broadcasting is not to be commercially viable. The whole purpose of public broadcasting is to provide what the market is not going to provide, and that is independent journalism that is essential for citizens in order to have a functioning democracy. And if we look at New Zealand compared to other OECD countries, our level of funding for public broadcasting per capita is abysmally low. It is almost as low as the United States, who is in fact the only country in the study that spends less on public broadcasting per capita than New Zealand. And I can tell members of this House, Mr. Speaker, and those watching on Parliament TV tonight, that public broadcasting is virtually non-existent in the United States. And it is part of the reason we have such a toxic media environment and such a broken democratic situation in the United States. The country that I come from. So if we look at other OECD countries and the amount of money that they invest in public broadcasting, because it is so important and critical to democracy, we can see that Australia spends 3 times as much as New Zealand per capita. The UK spends nearly 5 times as much per capita. And of course, small countries, similar size to New Zealand, Denmark, spends significantly more per capita, almost about 6 times as much as New Zealand. So New Zealand is falling behind, and of course it's in the interests of this national government to ensure that there isn't an independent, well-funded public broadcaster, because then there won't be anyone there to ensure that the electorate is hearing in-depth analysis and policy debates. It makes it easier for this national party to get elected when they can rely on superficial branding to get elected, and there's no scrutiny of the actual policy that they are implementing. The Green Party believes in democracy. We believe in properly funded, independent public broadcasting, not only on radio. We would immediately increase funding to Radio New Zealand so that they have a proper budget, and we would also ensure that there was proper public broadcasting available on television. We need a non-commercial television station, which has not occurred since we lost TVNZ 6 and 7. Of course, I think we need to go a lot further than that. if we want to provide the quality content and information that's not just about news and current affairs, although that's incredibly important and essential to democracy. It is also about entertainment and culture. After all, we don't want our children in New Zealand growing up with accents like mine. So it was important for New Zealand to preserve its independent identity, and it's valuable, I think, to New Zealanders. And I think the National Party is very defensive on this because they know that their own voters believe in Radio New Zealand, believe in public broadcasting, and what they would like to get away with is saying that they support these things, but not actually funding them. The truth is, we can't afford not to have public broadcasting. They would have you believe we don't have enough money for this. That's like saying we don't have enough money for elections. If we want a functioning democracy, we need a properly funded public broadcaster, both on television and on radio. And if the National Party actually supported Radio New Zealand, then they would increase the funding by at least the $6.7 million that KPMG recommended, and probably at least index to the rate of inflation, wage inflation. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll just conclude by saying that the Green Party wants to see a diverse and quality, strong, independent media that contributes to the maintenance of effective democracy and Aotearoa New Zealand's social, cultural, economic, and environmental well-being. This National Party understands the cost of many things, but the value of very few. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.